Hi, in this video we will read the Wikipedia page of the great physicist Richard Feynman. Richard Feynman was born on the day 11th of May 1918 and he died on 15th of February 1988. He was a great theoretical physicist. He belonged to uh, America, and he was one of the pioneers in the popularization of quantum mechanics, which is one of the most modern uh, theoretical physics. He was also awarded Nobel Prize physics in physics in 1965, and he is a very interesting character. He was not only a great scientist, apart from that, he was also well known um, as a painter. He has also done research in biology. He has been he has written a very popular book. So he was a polymath in some sense. So he was also instrumental in developing the first atomic bomb that US developed during the World War II, and that was later on used in the Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which eventually stopped the World War II. So he was part of that project. He was also the head of the investigation committee that investigated into the Challenger's disaster. Its Challenger was a mission by the NASA, um, and that failed. And the astronauts died, and that was lively telecasted, by the way. And maybe many people saw the disaster on the TV, and that was a big shock to the audience, and the government in US that time wanted to know why that actually happened. So Richard Feynman was given this task to find out what was the reason of the failure, and he came up with these reports where he found a lot of loopholes in the administration of NASA's missions. He was a long-time professor of theoretical physics in Caltech in California Institute of Technology. um, he has also written a few non-physics books, so we'll also talk about it. We'll first read about his early life. He was, as I've said, was born in US, in Newark in particular, in 1918. Okay, and he was born to a very middle-class family. He was born to a very middle-class family. They were Jews, and he was not very affluent, but yet he was very interested in academics. His father was an inspiration to him. His father always insisted him that you should think very originally, and you should not obey the authority. His father was working as a tailor in the for the army people. He was making dresses for armed forces people. And in armed forces, what used to happen in those days, in fact it also the case even now, is that the higher rank armed forces people used to be saluted by the lower rank people. His father used to tell him that, look, the people in the higher rank in armed forces, they haven't done nothing great to get that kind of a respect, so don't have unnecessary respect for authority. And something that he has used while investigating into scientific research, where he had very little respect towards what other had done. So he was very original, so to say, when he was thinking about all the theories and so on. He did very well in high school, and later on he was admitted to MIT for an undergrad program. He was initially in the maths department, but he wasn't very interested in the abstract mathematics, and later on he switched over to electrical engineering, but then he wasn't very interested in electrical engineering either. So he took a middle path, because electrical engineering is very applied, whereas mathematics is very is very abstract. So he chose something that is the middle of both. That's why he went in for um, physics. So completed his physics undergrad. He wanted to stay back in MIT, but his professor, one of his professor, he suggested him that you have seen MIT. It's better to explore another place. It's always good to explore newer places, newer people, and that's the reason why he went to Princeton. In the entrance test for the graduate program at Princeton, he scored the highest marks in physics and mathematics, which perhaps in those days used to be a record that probably nobody had scored that kind of marks in the entrance test. So he was in Princeton. He was in shock when he went to Princeton, because in MIT things were more American type, whereas Princeton was back then was more of an European university where you know there was some sort of an elegance. But Richard Feynman was somebody who loved the idea of freedom rather than simply obeying orders or doing things what everybody thought is the ideal way to do things, and so on. Like, he never cared about his dresses and all. But in Princeton, he was asked to wear blazers while coming for a graduate dinner or something. He has written greatly about it in his book later. All right, so there he received his PhD, and while doing his PhD in early 20s, he was um, he was invited to join the Manhattan Project. And Manhattan Project was something that was important in those days, during early 1940s, because there was World War II, and people were in fear that whether Germany, led by Hitler, could potentially have the first nuclear bomb, and if it has access to nuclear bomb, and then it will simply destroy the world. That's what was the fear. Anyway, so Princeton was interesting for him because he had a chance to interact with some of the finest brains across discipline. Albert Einstein was in Institute of Advanced Study at that time. So was John von Neumann, and they were the pioneer in their respective fields. Von Neumann was a great mathematician of his time, and Einstein, of course, we all know, is one of the finest scientists of all times. So they were there, and he found it very interesting. There were also people from other branches, like Gödel, who was a great logician. They were all intellectually vibrant community around that time, and he did enjoy his time at Princeton. So before even he received his PhD, he went on to work in the Manhattan Project. Obviously, he submitted his thesis before he went there, but he had also a personal tragedy during that time. He was married to his wife at a very young age, and his wife died of tuberculosis. And in those days, there were no treatment for tuberculosis, so he died. And during that time, he was working in the Manhattan Project that time, and he often would visit his wife, who was in the hospital. So his family members were slightly not comfortable with that, because um, his sister has confessed that his mother wasn't very happy with that, because in those days tuberculosis was a very deadly disease, and uh, they were apprehensive of the fact that Feynman could also get tuberculosis by being with her, and that was the fear then. He eventually died a few years later. Um, so he was involved in Manhattan Project, and there are many interesting stories about Feynman in Manhattan projects. He was in the theoretical division that was led by Hans Bethe. Okay, and the entire project was the scientific team was led by Robert Oppenheimer. He was a great scientist of those days. He was the head of that scientific committee, and the theoretical division was led by Hans Bethe. And Feynman, being a theoretical physicist, was assigned to Hans Bethe's team, where he used to work with many other young scientists. So from the very beginning, people recognize his talent towards computation, faster computation, and so on. In fact, people used to call him as a human computer because he used to compute so fast. um, Although he was a very junior member, but he was able to do a lot of good calculations at a very faster rate. Remember, in those days there were not powerful computers like we have now. um, so there was an interesting problem for which they had very short time to do the computation. Feynman did a fantastic job in computing everything within the given deadline, which was thought to be impossible. But he eventually was able to complete that work and with his team, and that was the first time when he was recognized widely among the other scientists, senior scientists at that place. Uh, so, and another important thing or interesting thing about Feynman was that during that project, he used to play pranks with many scientists, and that was so he was an interesting character, and he was quite loving and very um, somebody who was not like a typical scientist, less social and so on, but he was a life loving guy. So he used to love life. He used to enjoy more than just working in the laboratory. He was also used to enjoy outside of it. So Feynman was perhaps the only one, he has claimed, who has seen the nuclear test without wearing a safety glass. So everybody used to be given a safety glass to see the nuclear test, known as the Trinity nuclear test. But Feynman wanted to see it without wearing the glasses, and he did that. So that was some adventure, and he was always adventure loving. So he always wanted that. So post World War, he had a problem finding employment, like most physicists had in those days. Feynman initially was in University of Wisconsin Madison, but he later on he joined Cornell. He joined Cornell University, where he was invited by Hans Bethe. But in Cornell, he wasn't. Cornell was a mix of science and social science university, so he wasn't quite interested in social sciences. So he thought the the university is although quite good, and he personally liked Hans Bethe, but it lacked that the heterogeneity of scientific research. I mean, there were not many good people in other departments uh, whom he wanted to always discuss and expand his knowledge and so on. But he was around that time given the opportunity to work with Caltech, and that's when he liked. In the meantime, he also visited other countries to give lectures and so on. He went to Brazil, um, and so on. He also received offers from Institute of Advanced Studies in Princeton, but he was very surprised that Institute of Advanced Study that used to have professors like Albert Einstein and von Neumann, um, offered him a job. He didn't consider himself the worthy of that job. In fact, he wasn't also interested for one another reason was because there you wouldn't need to teach. You will only have to do research. And Feynman loved teaching. He was a showman. He used to love teaching and interact with students and young people, something that was lacking in Institute of Advanced Study back in those days. So he rejected the offer, and he instead went to Caltech for for a permanent position there. So he worked in Caltech, I think, till his retirement. Yeah, that's right. So he was involved in the cutting edge research work of the modern quantum mechanics, and so he was among the many pioneers in those days that worked tirelessly in advancing quantum mechanics. Apart from Paul Dirac, Niels Bohr, Max Born, um, Swingers and Murray Gilman and so many people others. So yeah, so that was his Caltech days. So he is best known for his Feynman diagram uh, in quantum electrodynamics, and he was given the Nobel Prize in 1965 for his contributions towards quantum electrodynamics. Yeah, so personal life, uh, it is a mixed opinion about people, but he was always somebody who loved his personal life, unlike many other scientists who he used to go to different dance bar to dance, to spend time with young people and so on, something that uh, a typical theoretical physicist wouldn't love to do. So he spent several weeks in Brazil and he loved there. He also learned how to play drums there. So he learned how to play Brazilian drums, and he learned to a great deal. So he didn't have any opinion about religion, politics, and so on. He had no interest in those areas, and he was extremely concentrated, focused in physics. That's why he was able to do a lot of progress in physics research. He was also involved in a lot of other things. For instance, Feynman lectures in physics. If you do a Google search, you will get Feynman lectures. It's easy to, if you just go to Google, the lectures are still there. If you are interested to learn physics, or any young guy who wants to learn physics to a great deal should visit this his lectures is still there. Yeah, in many areas you will get Feynman, not Feynman diagram, but the Feynman lectures. So you can also purchase that from the books, but it's with Caltech. On Caltech website, it's all free. All the 3 volumes are for free. So he was instrumental creating the curriculum for young people, school going and undergrads, students, which is now known as Feynman lectures on physics. And perhaps one of the his most cited work. It's more popular than his scientific research work. He was loved as a being a good joker. He used to joke, crack, he used to play pranks and used to crack jokes and all. And he was always a funny man. So he was some kind of a biography rather. So it was written, it's known as Surely or Joking Mr. Feynman. I'll highly recommend you. There's a free version of that on internet. You can read. It's a very interesting read. And he has talked about um, his interactions with various aspects of his life, whether it's science, his time in Los Alamos laboratory for nuclear bomb, his time in Brazil, how he used to spend time in different clubs and pubs, and his dancing abilities, how he used to play pranks with others and so on. So everything is very interesting book, you should read. He has been awarded Nobel Prize and many other prizes in his lifetime. And Feynman was also one of the pioneer in computing. He was one of the few people who talked about nanotechnology in 1960s, in those days when it wasn't even imagined by anyone. So in those days also he thought about uh, you know nanotechnology and the power of computer and computational technology in those days. He was also you know instrumental in setting up some kind of artificial intelligence, and he had some ground path breaking work in those days as well. So he was diagnosed with cancer and he got treatment, but later on that came back, and he died of cancer. Okay, in 1988 he died of cancer.